There are solutions existing currently, and it is a matter of society choice. And of course, it's up to people pressuring the government to create that policy environment for us to make those choices for renewable energy.
So really the ISA's credibility depends on its ability to demonstrate that it can act decisively to protect the ocean and not be succumbed to coercion by the industry to start mining for profit. How financial support for deep sea mining is dwindling, and that 24 trillion euros in assets has been shifted into policies that restrict or oppose deep sea mining.
Hello and welcome to the Ocean News podcast. I'm Eva Cahill, the editorial assistant here at Oceanographic magazine. The topic of deep sea mining doesn't always exactly fall neatly into the category of a positive news story. But as the 31st meeting of the International Seabed Authority draws to a close today, this podcast brings you two interviews looking at the current state of deep sea mining's international playing field, looking at how we build a green tech world without relying on deep sea minerals, and how we can and have in the past created international actions to stop the destruction of our oceans. But first, here's a quick overview of the current context. The International Seabed Authority, the ISA, is the international body established to decide how we treat our sea floor resources. Their job, in theory, is to manage the sea floor for the benefit of all humanity. The standing argument for the destructive practice of deep sea mining is essentially, we need these minerals for our green energy transition. The mass environmental harm it would unleash on our oceans is, for want of a better term, for the greater good. Of course, not everyone agrees with this, including a new report which finds deep sea minerals unnecessary in the green energy transition, but more on that later. At the moment, the ISA is convening in Jamaica, with tensions coming to a head over whether to create a mining code which would regulate and permit the industry, or whether to maintain a moratorium, a temporary stop on the activity until we have further science on the issue. And if you've been keeping tabs on the Oceanographic newsroom and this podcast, you'll be aware that the metals company has essentially been trying to find a way to circumvent these international processes, applying for licenses directly through the US to extract minerals from the deep sea floor. Japan too has been exploring its seabeds in the hope of extracting precious metals, signalling a growing impatience with international process. With this in mind, I spoke to Erica Finney, the ocean campaigner at Greenpeace International, about the global politics of deep sea mining and to get a sense of the way in which the world is currently leaning. I came away feeling genuinely hopeful about the financial and political roadblocks which might make these processes harder to move forward. Can you explain what's at stake really ecologically from Greenpeace's point of view when it comes to deep sea mining?
Yeah, sure. So the ocean is vital for our climate, food and for livelihoods. And many of us feel deeply connected to the ocean's beauty and wondrous marine wildlife. And if the mining industry were to get their hands on the deep sea, they could cause irreversible damage to this incredible world. And so that's why at Greenpeace we believe we have to stop this industry before it's begun. Specifically, deep sea mining poses a threat to one of the last truly untouched places on Earth. So not only will it risk irreversible damage to the ocean floor, it would damage incredible plant and animal life, it would impact the water column and cause harm to coastal Indigenous communities. And we're still discovering so much about what lives in the deep ocean, but we already know that deep sea mining is a bad idea. If mining were to start, ecosystems would be unlikely to recover from deep sea mining for millennia. So our campaign is about making sure that we don't let profit-hungry companies destroy the deep ocean before we've had a chance to even understand it, and that our ocean is too precious to mine.
And so the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, what would you describe their role as in the deep sea mining context? And they've been criticised for trying to regulate deep sea mining, but also in a way promoting the exploration of the deep seabeds. What's your sense of where they stand on deep sea mining and their persuasion in the whole thing?
Yeah, sure. So the International Seabed Authority is a regulatory organisation which is established to safeguard the global commons and to benefit humankind as a whole. So it's an institution in and of itself, but it's also made up of its members. So there are 171 member states plus the European Union that are party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which I guess specifically the Secretary General has recently taken quite a concerning stance advocating for governments to push through and finalise streamlined mining regulations this year. And this comes off the back of industry efforts to pursue unilateral mining outside of the ISA process. The company that's aiming to follow a path outside of the ISA, these actions have been described as illegal appropriation of the global commons, and they're an insult to this multilateral space. So really the ISA's credibility depends on its ability to demonstrate that it can act decisively to protect the ocean and not be succumbed to coercion by the industry to start mining for profit. We really want to make sure that at the current ISA meeting that's happening right now in Jamaica and beyond, that we're not rushing to finalise regulations to appease corporate interests, but instead that the ISA holds true to its responsibility to protect the global commons. And specifically, like member states, so governments are obligated to ensure the effective protection of the marine environment. And at the moment, the best available science tells us that mining would lead to permanent and irreversible damage to the ocean. So the role of governments at the ISA should be to stand against bullying efforts by rogue industry players and to decisively agree on a moratorium to stop unilateral mining from happening.
And so why is the ISA trying to push through a mining code? What's the purpose of it? Because I covered the metals company using their exploration contracts and kind of starting that initial privatisation mining process that Greenpeace has been following. Is it to try and keep in step with industry that have pushed ahead? Or do they believe that deep sea mining should go ahead on their own sort of autonomous decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I can't speak for the Secretary General of the ISA. I guess in a situation where rogue players are acting outside of the rules that we have, there are different responses to that. And our response is very much that we think a moratorium is the most responsible precautionary approach to address the threat of mining happening for industry to push back. I think, our position is really that proceeding with a mining code in response to rogue actors before the environmental risks are fully understood and before the suite of unresolved challenges in the current regulations are resolved would be really pushing a race to the bottom in regulatory standards.
And there obviously is like Trump's kind of come out in favour of deep sea mining and wanting to mine in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and other companies like Japan are embarking on their deep sea mining expedition at the moment. Is the genie out of the bottle a little bit when it comes to deep sea mining, or is it something we can still control and regulate?
Yeah, I think definitely not. I mean, there's a couple of reasons on the financial side, and then I think there are wider reasons in terms of the social licence that deep sea mining doesn't yet have. So maybe starting off financially, there's a recent study from the University of Edinburgh that highlights the economic flimsiness of deep sea mining, which demonstrates that the projected financial gains from mining are entrenched in assumptions about both mineral prices and the cost of extraction, both of which are really shifting variables. So deep sea mining remains still a really high risk investment. It's been, backed by what we're seeing from financial and insurance industries. So deep sea mining has been losing its financial license to operate before it's even begun. There's a report that was published last week by the Deep Sea Mining Campaign and Seas at Risk, which highlights how financial support for deep sea mining is dwindling, and that 24 trillion euros in assets has been shifted into policies that restrict or oppose deep sea mining. And so without finance or insurance, deep sea mining projects won't be able to commence. In addition to that, there's also the supply chain follow-on. So technology companies like key mineral users of car companies, tech companies are publicly rejecting deep sea mining and citing reputational and legal supply chain risks to using minerals that have come through this quite risky and unknown space in terms of what the industry will look like. That was the first part of your question. I feel like one was industry. What was the question you asked me again?
No, I think that does kind of answer my question. It was like, is the genie out of the bottle to an extent? And it also answers part of the question, how we stop private companies from mining the seabed, which you sort of touched on there, but I don't know if there's any more you can expand upon that.
Yeah, and that made me think about what the other thing I was going to say is that generally the resistance to seabed mining is really strong and unyielding. So in the past 6 months, there's been strong resistance in the areas where potential seabed mining licenses have popped up around the world. So that's resistance from local communities, scientists and environmentalists. They have slowed down the potential for licenses to come up in both Norway, the Cook Islands, and in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in the global space, there are 40 countries, over 1,000 scientists, and as I've said, major tech and finance companies that are opposing deep sea mining.
So is Trump's administration and the metals company kind of an anomaly then when we're looking at the international stage rather than the bulk of the opinion?
Yeah, so I guess Just for some context, the Metals Company is a mining company that has announced it would pursue a unilateral mining permit through the US government. That happened last year, and now that's going through the process of applying for a license through the US process. But there'll be roadblocks and resistance to mining throughout that process. So even if the Metals Company receives a US permit through the Trump administration, it depends on an international supply chain for mining to actually happen. So that's the ships that will go to sea, the processing and the refining of minerals. And that international supply chain operates under governments bound by international law. So those states have obligations to prevent their industries from participating in activities that breach international norms. So the Metals Company is not operating in a vacuum, it's operating in a global multilateral context, most of which the companies associated with the supply chain are bound by the law of the sea. So there's also significant and growing resistance to US mining within the US. So there are 4 states with legislation banning deep sea mining within the US. That's California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii, and other states considering legislation to block port access to deep sea mining ships. So I guess the global picture of this is that there's strong resistance both in the ISA space and through the pathway that Trump and the Metals Company are hoping to start mining in. And at the moment, no mining has started, and basically anywhere it's popped up as a potential, the strong community and scientific resistance has stopped it so far.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. Sometimes I think when I'm reading the news stories or reporting on things, it can feel like there's this massive driving private interest and very little to fall back on. So, what about the argument that we need these precious minerals in order to fuel our green energy transition? Well, the metals found on the ocean floor, like nickel, cobalt, and copper, are crucial to electric tech like wind turbines, electric vehicles, and solar roof tiles. But a new report from the Institute of Sustainable Futures and Greenpeace International suggests that by reducing the demand for raw materials through increased use of public transport, improved recycling programs, and advanced battery technologies, we can transition to a greener future without touching deep sea or socially and environmentally important ecosystems. The report essentially argues that smarter systems and behavioural changes could dramatically reduce our dependence on virgin mineral extraction altogether. I spoke to Elsa Lee, Head of Biodiversity at Greenpeace International, who is involved in compiling the report, to learn more. So, the report argues we can hit 1.5 degrees Celsius without mining in ecologically sensitive areas on land or at sea. And that's a really exciting thing to hear and a really exciting prospect. But how is this possible? What does the report say?
So, we do need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. That requires fossil fuel phase out and a swift transition to renewable energies like wind and solar. But this renewable energy system requires minerals to build, let's say, the solar panel, the wind turbine, and everything like that. But there's actually a number of policy options that we can reduce the mineral demand for energy transition. So in the research, we have listed out 5 policy recommendations. So the first of that is invest in shared mobility systems, like improve public transports with smaller and more efficient cars. Second one will be incentivize battery technology substitutions towards alternatives that require less specific minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. So cobalt and nickels are the minerals that are often being quoted as the key for deep sea mining. And then the third recommendation is to design for circularity and scale up recycling. We really need these minerals once being mined and used in the renewable energy system that can be repeatedly used and recycled. And then the fourth will be prioritize this mineral use for essential energy transition needs. So many of these minerals have multiple uses, not only for renewable energy. They are sometimes in building materials. In Greenpeace's point of view, it really needs it to be used for the benefits of all, and solving climate change is very key for that. And then lastly, knowing all these things that need and the demand of minerals, we need to protect certain key ecosystem from mining. And within that, we really need to respect the Indigenous peoples and local communities' rights and safeguarding the ecological integrity.
And I kind of assume that the report came about because there's this rhetoric behind deep sea mining companies that we need these minerals on the seafloor in order to make that green energy transition possible. And there's an idea that we have no choice but to deep sea mine. How does that challenge that discourse and how powerful do you think the argument is in the report?
I mean, there's often this kind of what I call the force dilemma between mining either the deep sea or vulnerable ecosystem on land, like the rainforest. But this research really shows us that we can do both. Oftentimes, the push for deep sea mining, and sometimes on land, is based on very extractivist and colonial patterns, rather than really finding solutions that serve both people and the planet. There are many ways to reduce the mineral demands, like I said earlier. So one specific examples could be, if we need to electrify our transport system, we need electrical vehicles. The most mineral kind of intensive is the batteries. And then there's actually different types of battery exist already now that doesn't need either cobalt or nickel. So there's like one way, like it's a policy choice that we can use one certain technology over another. And there are also other policy incentives that can help us reduce mineral demand, like public transport and everything like that. So this dilemma that many times the mining industry use, if they don't dig deeper into, there are solutions and choices that we can make. And then that's what this report is trying to tell us. There are ways to do both.
And why, can you correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a sodium ion battery, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah. Why is that not being pursued more by companies looking to integrate green technology into their cars and things like that? Why is it favouring the batteries which use like lithium and cobalt and all those types of precious metals?
Because it's newer, so it hasn't been kind of commercialized as much. And like it's really a promising technology that doesn't need really many of these minerals as we see it. So it is really like up to, I say, car companies, battery companies to make the choices. Like sodium, basically salt, is vastly available. The cost of these things should be a lot less than ones from, let's say, lithium, which has a very tight or constrained supply. So it is really up to the company's choices, as well as policy incentive to make sure these technologies are being used by more companies.
And I guess that kind of links into my next question, which is a lot of the solutions in the report rely on consumer changes, policy changes that we already desire to create a carbon neutral or like a world that is more resilient or stops global warming, which is, you know, changing how we move, consuming less, designing our economies for circularity. And if that's the solution to deep sea mining and these things are, as a population, we already seem to be resisting changing our behaviours in that way. Is it possible that we can move away from deep sea mining by putting these policies in, or have we proven time and time again that it doesn't really work and people don't really change their behaviours?
Yeah. For me and for Greenpeace, the solution for deep sea mining is relatively simple. Just don't start with it. It has not started commercial wise, and we should not start it. And the solution for climate change is like a little bit more complicated, much more complex. But in this research context, we're talking about energy transition to renewable energy. And one of the key differences between a fossil fuel-based energy system and one that is based on renewable energy like wind and solar is that the demand for these minerals, we really need to mine it once. Like I said earlier, we can mine it, put it into this wind turbine or solar panel, and if we do it right, we can recycle it indefinitely. Whereas fossil fuels, let's say coal or oil, you basically need to continuously mine them, and it's burnt and it's gone. So like overall, we really have a very good opportunity to create a just and green transition. But we do need like responsible political leadership to steer us into this solution, rather than letting our corporate elites getting the benefits of it. And by reducing the demand, like what was said earlier and listed out in the report, we can really carefully choose where and how we mine these minerals. How can we, especially centering the rights of indigenous people and local community, and also doing it in a way that minimizes environmental impact of mining? We do need political leadership in making sure we're going into the right way, but the solutions are there.
Yeah. So if we're going to extract anything, we need to make sure that we'll continue to use those resources forever and make sure we're taking them from the places which will cause the least amount of damage.
Exactly. Yeah. And minerals can do that instead of fossil fuels. But we do need to set up this circular system, recycling, very good kind of like collection and everything. And also with policy support for these to be kind of put into the renewable energy manufacturing system in there.
I guess it's quite a nice vision of society that you paint, that we can like basically have a nice circular economy, everyone's using public transport. It's a really attractive vision. That's not a question, that's just, it's so easy, so excited by these things and then feel like the deep sea mining companies are so interested in the short-term financial gain from it that we're never going to be able to reach that. How optimistic do you feel on like a personal level about how we can value these minerals as a society, whether we'll learn from how we treated fossil fuels and the discourse around that?
Yeah, definitely. I think like we should definitely not repeat the mistakes we make with fossil fuels. I mean, I think personally, like this research is about a year in the making. In the beginning, I know very little about minerals and energy system, but throughout this research, I know that wow, actually it's possible. There are solutions existing currently, and it is a matter of society choice. And of course, it's up to people pressuring the government to create that kind of environment and policy environment for us to make those choices for renewable energy. And we do need to do this right because we do not have too much time to lose over here. So yeah, I certainly hope that this research provide that hopeful message for us all to make sure that we look into the minerals and the resources needed for renewable energy system in a different lens.
The report is exciting, offering a way out of the extractive mindset fueling deep sea mining. But the question of whether these behavioural recommendations would be enough to change our path internationally still looms. So I return to Erica to delve further into the global implications. Looking at the report that Greenpeace put out, what does that report mean for the ISA, and how should they, or how do Greenpeace think they should take it into account? What implications would it have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing and fantastic news that the kind of message that Greenpeace has had for a long time, that we can achieve an energy transition without mining the deep sea, has now been backed up with a really robust study that forecasts different scenarios for what our mineral needs will be in the future to achieve the energy transition. And yeah, so the study finds that we can protect nature with less mining on land than is often protected, and without opening the ocean frontier for deep sea mining at all. So it maps areas of the world that should be off limits to mining based on their ecological richness or the risk of human rights impacts in those areas, and supports the idea that with the right leadership and the right choices, we can harness existing and emerging technologies to both stop the climate crisis, transition to a renewable energy future, and do that without opening up the ocean to mining.
And so should the power or the decisions of the ISA and those international governance bodies be about reducing the need for any sort of mining rather than deliberating on its character or how damaging it is?
Yeah, so I guess the International Seabed Authority is quite bound by its remit of the international seabed. So in that space, really, what we want to see happening at ISA meetings is for governments to come together to agree on a global moratorium on deep sea mining, which is the responsible precautionary approach to address gaps in science and to uphold international law. In terms of, I guess, other global spaces where we should see governments come together to develop pathways for an energy transition and for protection of the ocean, there are also other multilateral spaces like the recently ratified Global Ocean Treaty and the United Nations framework. But yeah, I guess the broad message that in these challenging geopolitical times and when we see corporate players want to harm our environment for profit, the response that we need from most countries and most nations that really care about science and want to protect the ocean is that we need strong multilateral opposition to industries that are causing harm. So in the space of deep sea mining, that's a strong global moratorium.
What really is an international moratorium? How do they work, and do they work?
Yeah, so a moratorium on deep sea mining would be a way of protecting the global oceans, and it aligns with how states and other activities that pose harm or create risk to the environment. The moratorium that many people have heard of before is the International Whaling Moratorium, which banned the practice of whaling for profit. It was passed by governments in the 1980s. So, for example, by stopping killing humpback whales and allowing their population to recover, this species has made a remarkable comeback. And I know that this is something that you've touched on in the Ocean News podcast. So in the mid-1950s, there were only about 450 humpback whales left. Now their population is thriving, with estimates of over 80,000 humpbacks that live in our global oceans. And so the global position that governments took together to make a collective decision that we needed to stop this practice that was causing harm was really successful. Now there are other threats, including fishing nets and the threat of noise pollution from deep sea mining, which may be a threat to whales in the future. But the moratorium itself on whaling is widely celebrated as a global success.
It is nice to have those examples when things have actually worked, and you can feel hopeful and not just sort of despairing and feeling like it's out of your control. As Erica says, the world has rallied before to stop an ecologically destructive practice, and whaling's financial gain was far less speculative, and the industry was far more established. Could scientists, politicians and companies rally again, or are we facing another fossil fuels crisis in the making? The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and what is decided in Jamaica will shape it for generations to come. Let us know your thoughts in the podcast's comment section, and subscribe for more stories following deep sea mining and our blue planet. This has been the Ocean News podcast. I've been Eva Cahill. Thank you for listening.